a buck 75. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments, and we dissect it all with the writer, author, historian, CompuBox counter, and one of the great wiffle ball players of all time, Lee Groves. How you doing, Lee?
How'd you hear about the wiffle ball
I
stuff?
just, when in doubt, make it up. I don't know.
Okay,
But it sounds good, and
it
we'll
does.
go with it. Now, we are determined to do a swift version. I don't know if we'll get this done in under 15 rounds, but anyway, what are we going to do? We got some reviews of what took place across that pond. Eubank and Ben 2, the Suns. We've got some previews of Saudi Arabia, what's coming up there. And we got some other cool stuff. What else is going on other than the reviews and the previews? What do we got?
Well, we got a couple of news items that we're going to go over, and in the final segment, now this is November 22nd, and it's the 39th anniversary of Mike Tyson winning his first heavyweight title belt, and we're going to relive that day and also spin off a few topics off of that fight. So stay tuned.
Okay, good stuff. So take it away with reviews. A lot of people were jam packed in there to see what would happen in Eubank and Ben 2. Eubank got the nod in the first fight, but not last Saturday.
Well, given what happened in their first fight in April, this one-time big top fight became a big time fight because most observers, including me, believed that the styles would once again mesh very well. But once the opening bell sounded, it became very clear that Ben was better than he was in April, while Eubank was worse, much, much worse. Ben dominated just about every round, and he finished the fight with a pair of knockdowns in the fight's final minute. And in the end, it was a mathematical and statistical wipeout in favor of Ben. The judges turned in scorecards of 119-107, 118-108, and 116-110. And the CompuBox stats indicated that Ben outlanded Eubank 173 to 68 in total punches. And he landed 49% of his power shots compared to Eubank's 22%. Eubank landed no more than 8 total punches in any round, while Ben was in double digits in 10 of the 12 rounds, and he had 23 in the 10th round alone. I saw that several folks predicted a Conor Ben win. I wasn't one of them, but I don't think that even they could have predicted a near shutout. That wasn't on my bingo card. What are your general thoughts about the fight, Conor Ben's performance, and Chris Eubank showing?
Conor Ben, no doubt, upped his game. He upped his game. He fought better. I was watching, and your comments during the fight, and you were texting me. You kept using that word maturity. You know how Ben looked like a much more mature fighter, and he was disciplined. And he did as well as I think he can do. I don't know if we'll ever see a better performance from him than that. And it came on the biggest stage. Not taking anything away from Ben. However, here comes the however.
Right.
Um, the other dude, Eubank, is, on that other side, and we talk about this a lot. I'm sure a lot of people who watch this show all the time will say, there he goes again. Can't help it, folks. I understand and know the sport, from a lot of different angles that most people don't. And I can tell when a fighter is on that other side. Now, you could say, was he weight drained, Eubank? He might have been. He looked it. He definitely looked
Sure
stale.
did.
He could have also been weight drained and overtrained. However, and we won't know this just because Smitty says it, but I think that's it for him. He can still fight. He'll still can win some fights, but he was never a great fighter. He was a good fighter, very good. And that's it. He's on the other side. So all that is left for him to do is try to get some wins and make some money. I just do not see in him the ability. I don't even want to see a third fight. I know he won the first fight, but based on this, I don't want to see a third fight. And so it's more about what will he decide to do. And you know where my head is at this point in my life. And I would just like to see him retire. He's had a good career, an overachiever, in my opinion. Certainly wasn't as good as his daddy, neither is Ben. Now, for Ben, there's a lot. There's so much attractive stuff across the pond where he's at, or he could cross the pond and come over here and I think do quite well at a buck, what, 47.
Yeah, in fact, I think the most natural fight next for him is to come down to 147 and fight Lewis Crocker, the IBF champion. It would be a very attractive domestic fight. Or, he could come over here and fight Raleigh for the WBA title. He could go after Mario Barrios. Everybody's going after Mario Barrios these days.
Well, and Ben would win, and Ben would win both of those fights.
Yeah, he probably would. Based on this performance, he looks superb. It's probably the best performance of his career. Overall, he was mature, he was disciplined, he wasn't reckless. He kept his head, and that's very important because Ben had always been a mercurial, emotional fighter. He was in control all the way through, and very, very impressed by what I saw. Future's bright for him. Probably as bright as it's ever been. No pun intended.
Yeah. All right. So do we bounce to Saudi Arabia?
We do bounce to Saudi Arabia, and to tell you the truth, this is probably the best top to bottom card that we've had this year. And it'll begin with Abdullah Mason taking on Sam Noakes for the WBO lightweight title. They're fighting for the title that Keyshawn Davis lost on the scales before his scheduled first defense against Edwin De Los Santos in June. Ironically, Mason's most recent fight against Jeremiah Nakatila became the new main event on that card, and he produced a main event level performance in scoring the fifth round quarter retirement victory. At age 21, he has the opportunity to become the youngest male to hold a widely recognized world title. And if victorious, he'll be more than a year younger than the current occupant of that status, top-ranked stablemate Xander Zayas. Now, as for Noakes, he's undefeated. He's the current Commonwealth champion. He is a puncher. He has 15 knockouts and 17 wins. And based on what I've seen, he appears to be the best all-around opponent that Mason has faced so far. He's a solid guy. And Mason did show some vulnerability with his chin last year when he was floored twice in the first round against Johan Vasquez. To Mason's credit, he scored his own knockdown in that first round, and he ended up stopping Vasquez in the very next round. If that happens again, Noakes can definitely win, but Noakes is fighting a southpaw for only the second time in his pro career, and he too may well be facing the highest caliber foe of his career. Noakes is good, but Mason looks special, and most of the time special beats good. I think that Mason's going to stop him. And the next fight could be the show stealer, I think, as WBC and WBO super flyweight champion Jesse Bam Rodriguez meets WBA counterpart Fernando Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a high-volume pressure fighter from Argentina who is coming off back-to-back decision victories over a guy you covered in Kazuto Ioka. Yeah. Like Rodriguez, he's undefeated, and he is in the best form of his career. But unlike Bam, who's 25 years old, Rodriguez is 34, and he's been in a lot of high-contact fights. And not only that, Bam is one of the best all-around fighters in the game. In the pound-for-pound ratings, I put him number 5 behind the big three of Crawford, Usyk, and Inoue, and right below Dmitry Bivol. This will be a very entertaining fight for as long as it lasts, but I do see Bam scoring a later-round TKO. What do you think of Bam as a fighter?
Oh, I love him. When I watch him, I think a little bit about Chocolatito in his prime. And I also think about this guy named Orlando Canizales.
Yeah.
Some of the subtleties with the feet and the ability to punch and with both hands and from different angles. And I think he's fantastic.
I agree with you. He has shown next level skill.
Yeah.
And he's been doing it for years now. And
Yeah.
I think we're going to see it again. Now, the co-main event may well be the most interesting match of the card, as WBO welterweight champion Brian Norman Jr. fights former lightweight and super lightweight champion Devin Haney. Norman is coming off a one-punch KO of the year caliber stoppage of Jin Sasaki in June, while Haney's last outing saw him win on points against Jose Carlos Ramirez in what was best described as a track meet. Smitty, I know you've had your doubts about Devin Haney, and that last fight didn't do anything to change your mind. Do you think Haney will bounce back, or do you think he's going to get bounced around by Norman?
That's the question, and again, the last show we actually filmed within this corner, as you know, was with Devin Haney years ago when he was a prospect before he won a world title. I actually took the chance and did the show thinking that he probably would win a world title, and he did, and he did. And there's been some very impressive things he's done going across the pond and, going down under and getting a couple of victories over Kambosos and fighting Lomachenko to what I thought was a flip of the decision either way. It could have gone either way, that fight. But then came Ryan Garcia
Yeah.
and that fight and that night and that not right, but left that kept landing and landing and landing. And I give Haney tremendous credit. We obviously took issue with how many times he got hit by the shot that he should have known was coming from the one trick pony that is Ryan. But he also showed a hell of a lot of toughness getting up from
Sure
that.
did.
Because he was hurt early. I think it might have been the first round.
It was the first left hook that he landed. It hurt him.
It'll sound crazy, but here you go, Dazzling Dawn. You wanted me to find a squirrel mention. I think that Haney has become squirrely, very squirrely. Boy, I'm good. Reminds me of a little bit of Hector Camacho after the Rosario fight. I was lucky enough to talk to Hector that night, and I remember him crying on the phone to me. He was that upset. But Hector changed in that he would get on his bicycle more, but Hector knew how to win and win impressively on his bicycle. He also had, a pair of the best legs I've ever seen in boxing. And I don't know if I know Haney did it in his last fight, but he looked horrible doing it. And in other words, I think his path to victory will be this week, tonight or today will be his experience and his boxing ability. But I don't know if his mind isn't thinking about box and use the jab and, hit and don't get hit or run, because he ain't going to run to a victory against this dude. And we'll find out. This is like the litmus test. But I think he's gotten squirrely. I don't think he's going to recover from it. And I like what Norman reminds me of, an old school fighter. He gets hit a lot, too much, because he's so confident. He comes in and knocks your shots down and hits you. I really dig the way he fights. Like to see him be a little bit more responsible. I think he stops Devin Haney.
When I started analyzing this fight for CompuBox, I thought much like you did. I saw that one punch knockout against Jin Sasaki. It may go down as the knockout of the year. He left Sasaki flat. And
It
of
was a
course,
left hook, by the way.
with the left hook, which happens to be Devin Haney's bugaboo
Achilles
punch.
heel, yeah.
Very, very much so. But then I started thinking about it a little more and running the numbers a little bit more. And I thought, you know what? One of the biggest chasms between the two is experience.
Means a lot.
And Devin Haney has been a professional for a long time.
Yeah.
He has fought a number of high quality guys. Quality of competition
I mean,
is very
Kambosos and
important.
Lomachenko and Regis Prograis and Ryan. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of experience for a guy of his age,
Right.
you know. And I think that he also has something to prove. He knows for sure how unimpressive he was in beating Ramirez. And I'm sure he's going to be pressured to find that balance between defensive responsibility and offensive success. And I think that his reservoir of experience and his know-how, Norman doesn't have that yet. He has the power, but what's he going to do against the very best opponent that he has ever faced, and not by a little? I think that Devin Haney will find a way. It's going to be a balancing act. He's going to have to avoid that left hook, and he's going to be in danger every second of every round. But I think Haney's going to find a way, and I think he's going to win on points.
Okay, and on to the main event.
On to the main event. And that main event will see David Benavidez defend his WBC Light Heavyweight Championship and his secondary WBA belt against Anthony Yarde, who will be trying to win a widely recognized world title for the third time after unsuccessful efforts against Sergey Kovalev in 2019 and Artur Beterbiev in 2023. For him, this is the last chance saloon, and for Benavidez, it could set him up for bigger and better things down the road. What are your thoughts about the match? Who's going to win and why?
Either strike three, you're out, or the third time's a charm.
Right.
There's not too much charming stuff that happens against David Benavidez. He will have his moments. Yarde, to look at him, he's like an Adonis the way he's sculpted. But I just think that, he's just going to be always one of those guys that he gets up, gets in there. I think back to the Kovalev fight and the Beterbiev fight. He'll have his moments, and I think he should go for it early. And also, Benavidez sometimes takes some time off, and his fundamentals go a little bit astray during the middle rounds, and then he gets it back together. And that's what I think will happen, and he'll close strong. And I don't know that I think he might stop Yarde late. It'll either be decision, Benavidez, or late stoppage. But I think it'll be an interesting fight as long as it lasts. And I like Benavidez, obviously.
I agree. And one thing that has been evident in Benavidez's last few fights, he's been a slow starter. And he could be vulnerable in the early rounds. And that's when Yarde's
And this guy's a bigger guy in terms of naturally being a bigger guy. Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And he is a legitimate hitter at light heavyweight. He's going to test that chin of Benavidez. But that chin has been tested, and it has passed that test just about every time, So I see Yarde pressing the action early, but Benavidez has that extra gear, especially in the second half of a fight, where he just lets go. And once he lets go and allows those wood chipper combinations go, he busts things, he breaks things. Yeah. And I think that in the end, in one of the later rounds, maybe 9-11, he will break Yarde and retain.
He will say, "Get out of my yard. You're out of here." We're going to take a break, come back with more right after this.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back in this corner, the podcast with Lee Groves. All right, Lee, what do you got? You're not going to raise my blood pressure again, are you? Am I going to have to get Charlie to get me some lisinopril here? What are we going to talk about? Please don't say it.
You should have learned from last week and take your lisinopril before the show.
I actually did.
Oh, good.
I did. Because I just think when you mention a certain name, I might need more. But go ahead.
Well, here's the name. Now, last week we discussed the cancellation of you-know-who's exhibition against Gervonta Davis and who might take his place. Well, on Monday, the identity of that fighter was revealed, and it was former two-time heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua. And the fight is going to take place December 19th in Miami, Florida. And here are the particulars.
Even more disgraceful that it's in. Go ahead. My hometown.
Yeah. Well, here are the particulars. Fight is scheduled for 8 3-minute rounds. They will be wearing regulation 10-ounce gloves. The result will be included in their official records. And here's the kicker: AJ must weigh a maximum of 245. Now, as a frame of reference, he scaled 252 and a quarter before his most recent fight against Daniel Dubois nearly 15 months ago. And the last time he weighed 245 or less was when he scaled 244 and a half before his rematch with Usyk in August 2022. Now, it was reported that Netflix gave Jake Paul 3 names from which to pick. One was Ryan Garcia, one was Terrence Crawford, the third was Anthony Joshua. Garcia was unavailable because he, like every other welterweight, is pursuing a title fight with Mario Barrios. Crawford was offered the match, but he said no. Beneath him, I think. Well, we know it's beneath him. That left Joshua, who was given permission by DAZN to fight on Netflix. Now, we all know how you feel about Jake Paul and what he represents, but this fight is different because he's not just fighting a fellow YouTuber. He's not fighting an aged MMA fighter, and he's not fighting a much shorter and much smaller professional fighter like Tank. He's fighting a bigger, stronger, harder-hitting opponent, albeit one that's coming off a long layoff and a KO loss. First, do you think this is going to be a real fight? And second, if this is a real fight, what's going to happen?
Yeah, the fact that you even have to frame the question like that is what is so disgraceful. And I know what everybody else is doing. All the others, I won't name them, but all the others are going to say, oh, now you got to give Jake Paul so much credit. Oh, my God, he's stepping up to the plate. It's bullshit again. Yes, he's stepping up to the plate. If it's real, he's going to get shellacked. And I hope he does. I hope he gets beaten to in fact, I hope it's not a 15-second knockout, 30-second, 1 minute, 2-round. I hope AJ carries him, and not to the end, but nearly to the end, and in a way that he will show him what it is really like to face somebody like that. Jake Paul's made an awful lot of money, and really, yes, he's put on these shows with Amanda Serrano, and help the women, help the few women fighters. But I think he's been very deleterious for the sport. These type of fights are very deleterious for the sport, and I just think there's something we don't know. I don't believe in conspiracy theories and fixed fights and all that, but whatever the case may be, a lot of people will be talking about it, and it will get a lot of attention, although a lot of people over here don't know AJ, especially the kind of people that watch Paul. So for whatever it's worth, we'll talk about it as it gets closer, but what I do hope is it will mark perhaps the end of what do you call it? Big top boxing.
Yeah.
I call it loads of crap. And we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, so on to the next subject, please.
Yeah, the next subject, I mentioned Alexander Usyk a little earlier, and speaking of him, it was reported that he has relinquished the WBO title, and as a result, the interim title holder, Fabio Wardley, is now the full-fledged WBO champion. Now, most people will say that Wardley is an email champion, but he actually earned that designation in the ring last month when he scored a come-from-behind knockout against Joseph Parker. The interim title was on the line, with the understanding that the holder of the interim title will be elevated to full champion if the full champion decides to relinquish the title. So he was in the ring, he earned his status. As for Parker, he tested positive for cocaine on the day of the fight, and because of that, he faces a suspension that could effectively end his career. What are your thoughts on Wardley, and what are your thoughts on Parker, who you know pretty well?
Yeah. Wish I could say I was totally shocked by what happened with Parker, but I'm not. I'm not going to get into why. I just hope that it can be explained away, but I don't think so. And if that is, and you're taking Coke on the week of a fight, the day of a fight, it's obviously very deleterious to your health and to the opponent. And I don't see it as a performance enhancing drug, maybe with certain people, but so I just hope he gets his stuff together. And I don't know. I think it could be a career ender for him. And as for I don't know what to think of
Wardley.
yeah, Wardley and what he's going to do. He's a good fighter. Um, I like what I see, but he was losing that fight, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Until AJ got it together. So I would say that for him, it is kind of a mail-in situation in a way because Usyk relinquished it, but
Yeah.
he's still, he's going to create some buzz. I just think he's a good fighter. Him and Dubois, there's a lot of attractive fights out there with him, in my
Sure.
opinion. So
Yes.
that's what I think of him.
Very much so.
And as
this
for
is
Usyk, by the way,
Hmm.
I just, again, I know he's not going to do it, but I just would like to see him. Man, I'd love to see him sail off into the sunset and retire unbeaten and let people wonder where does he rank amongst the great, fighters of all time and heavyweights,
And speaking of fantasy fights, history and where fighters are placed in history, boxing Twitter, a place that I avoided for many, many years, but joined a little more than 4.5 years ago. It's been buzzing about a fantasy fight between Joe Calzaghe and Saul Canelo Alvarez. And some are saying Joe wins, some are saying Canelo wins. Had they fought in their respective primes, who do you think will win and why?
Horrible fight. Horrible fight for Canelo. Canelo has what? What is his weakness?
Slow feet.
What does the other guy do?
Other guy moves very well in both hands and feet.
Yeah, and there you go. I think the dexterity, there's a great word, I haven't said it in a
Yeah.
few. The dexterity of Calzaghe would, I think, win him. He ain't stopping Canelo, but I think he'd win a decision. I could see him getting dropped along the way. My buddy Joe got dropped by, I think Bernard dropped him. I think Roy dropped him. Kind of
Yep.
flash knockdowns
Yeah.
because, sometimes Joe would get in there and get a little, throwing the punches and be
A
feeling
little
it.
frisky.
Yeah. But I think that Canelo would just never be able to get started against him. I think there'd be a little danger for Joe at more than one moment of that fight, but I think he wins the fight by decision.
I agree with you. He's taller, he's longer, he's much, much busier.
Yeah.
Canelo's a really good body puncher. He's very efficient. In his younger days, he was a very good combination puncher. And in fact, both of us thought at one point he was the best combination puncher in boxing.
Yeah.
He's had problems with southpaws even when he was younger.
Yeah.
Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, they pushed him.
Yeah.
And Joe Calzaghe is greater than both of them. And you could say very, very seriously that Joe Calzaghe's the greatest 168-pound fighter who ever lived. He had a title reign that lasted longer than a decade. Not many
Yeah.
fighters can say that.
Canelo Canelo, you said about he was at one point one of maybe the best combination puncher, but Canelo was kind of a rhythm fighter. He would do some feigning and then set up the combos, and they would be, usually in threes at the most four. But it's hard to set up those combinations against a guy like Calzaghe, who's throwing and hitting you and peppering you. He's like fighting pepper spray. He's
Yeah.
like a bear who has to deal with pepper spray, and I just think that it's you and I talk a lot personally too about bad fights for guys. That's a horrible fight for Canelo, isn't it? I think.
It really is. And all you have to do is look at the Bivol fight. Bivol knew how to use his height and his reach and his defensive skills. He threw, in my mind, it was a 9-3, 10-2, maybe.
Yeah.
He really dominated Canelo, and I foresee something similar here.
And by the way, that Joe Calzaghe's big. He's
Yes.
a bigger dude. So anyway, you can see the sun coming down on Smitty. It's amazing how that happens. And so what I will do is I will take a break. I'm going to adjust the sun, and we'll come back. And but it is kind of a good segue. We'll be wrapping it up right after I adjust the sun. We'll be back.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back, final segment in this quarter of the podcast, a buck 75 memories and moments on this date. When what did happen?
Well, 39 years ago today, Mike Tyson became the youngest man ever to win a share of the heavyweight championship when he stopped WBC champion Trevor Berbick in round 2. He was 20 years old when he did it. The fight took place at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas, and Tyson, who was rated first by the WBA and WBC and had a record of 27-0 with 25 knockouts, was that rare challenger who entered the bout as the betting favorite. In fact, he opened as a 6-1 favorite, and by fight time, the odds did drop to 3-1, but it's still significant. Berbick was making the first defense of the title he won from Pinklin Thomas 8 months earlier as a 6.5-1 underdog. So he's used to being on the short end, right, in that respect. And here's an interesting twist. Tyson Berbick was billed as Judgment Day, which happens to be the very same phrase that will be used for the Jake Paul Anthony Joshua bout. Yeah, I know. Listen to pro. Okay. Well, anyway, both men came into the fight medically compromised. 3 days before the fight, Berbick experienced breathing problems so severe that he had to get respiratory medication. And worse yet, he had to visit 4 doctors before he could get a hold of medication that would be approved by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Meanwhile, Tyson, according to his 2013 autobiography, Undisputed Truth, entered the ring that night suffering from gonorrhea, for which he had been given an antibiotic. And here's a quote from him. "Because of the antibiotic shot, I was dripping like a good humor bar in July," end quote. But I didn't care. I was there to nail Berbick, and nail him he did. He scored the first knockdown with a combination in the opening moments of round 2, and then he ended the fight with a short hook to the temple that put Berbick on the floor not once, not twice, but 3 times before referee Mills Lane stopped the fight. When he waved off the bout, HBO blow-by-blow commentator Barry Tompkins declared, "We have a new era in boxing." Now, first, where were you and what were you doing in November 1986? And what were your thoughts about Tyson's potential back then?
Yeah, I had begun my radio career in Southwest Florida, in Fort Myers, Florida. I might have been working at a 1,000-watt station, WCAI, where I had to, at the end, because I was the last person on I had to be there at like 7 a.m. and then do sportscast, do my talk show at the end, which interestingly enough, I had Mike Tyson on that show before he was champion, and did a short interview with him. And that was one of those too. That was to say anybody like Steve Albert would appreciate this because he's a radio guy. I used to have to wait after the show and power down the station, with a series of turning things off. And I still remember that. So I was working in radio, obviously retired just a year earlier from my own brilliant boxing career as a pro, and paying attention to Mike and following him just like we all did. And I certainly thought that he would beat Trevor Berbick, and so it didn't surprise me at all. And then it was just, wow, how good can this guy, become? That's what I was thinking then.
Yeah, well, back then I thought the sky was the limit for Tyson. Even before he fought Berbick, he had this mystique that suggested that he could be a champion for a very, very long time. When Tyson was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he said that he felt he hadn't reached even 50% of his potential. And I think he was right because to put that potential in context, Joe Louis held the heavyweight championship for 11 years and 255 days, and he recorded 25 successful title defenses. Had Tyson reached Lewis's longevity record, he would have only been 32. And had he recorded 3 defenses per year, which wasn't unusual for the era, he would have recorded north of 35 title defenses. But as we know, he fell far, far short of those numbers. Now, you have espoused a theory for many years about unusually short fighters, especially short heavyweights, that has largely held true. Can you explain that theory and how it has manifested?
Ironically, when I first started working on it and thinking about it, was back with I was after the Joe Frazier fights with Ali, and I started thinking about Joe's age. Joe was shot at 32 or done. Then I looked at Marciano, 32. Then I looked at Dempsey, 32. And there are others that I could, and I started wondering what it is, and it's obvious. And I talked to Frazier about this. I've talked to other heavyweights about it, shorter dudes. It takes so much for a little guy to get in there. Again, imagine what Mike, what Marciano, what Dempsey, what Tua, what all of them had to go through to get past get through a Larry Holmes or a Lennox Lewis, or all the bigger guys that they would face. It takes so much energy, and then defensively, it can be a nightmare when you're that small, that short. So you have to have so much energy, and it takes so much that your candle's going to burn out quite naturally earlier than a bigger man who's larger and can do, the heavyweights like Larry Holmes, who could go way into their 30s, George Foreman, who went into his 40s, and the Klitschko's, and now we see it. You mentioned AJ, what's he, late 30s, and
36.
and Usyk, but there has never really been a short heavyweight that did much after the age of 32. And as far as Mike, look, I think Mike's an overachiever. I think what he did was simply amazing, but he was never going to do it past a certain age. And for him to say, oh, I only reached part of my prime, and all the bullshit that I've heard from so many people about, oh, had he stayed with, with Cuss, or had he stayed with Kevin Rooney, had he not gone to Don King, to play devil's advocate against myself, I could say, sure, King and others might have gotten in his head, but Mike was a boy when he was with Cus D'Amato, and Cus treated him like a little boy. Mike wasn't going to remain a boy, and he grew up. He's a street kid who became a street man. Who was the perfect guy then to get him was Don King. But what was Mike going to do? Have a plan B where as he got older, he's going to start sticking the jab and using combinations and footwork? No, he was a basically one-trick pony with two devastating hands and fists, but one trick: quick, fast, explosive. I think that's your word, explosive. Right. But also, he never had power. Let me rephrase. He never had devastating power after 7 or 8 rounds. You go 7 or 8 rounds with Mike, most likely you're going the distance. Whereas other guys who weren't quite as quick, the shorter guys like Joe, like Tua, like Marciano, they could knock you out later in a fight. And all of those guys did, because they weren't quite as explosive. They had more stamina. That power that Mike had so early, they could carry it late. They didn't produce the highlight reels that Mike did, but they were able to sustain it over 12 and 15 rounds. He couldn't do it. I think Mike is an overachiever. I think he did more And I think so much of him, and maybe you're going to get to this, is just lost in the hype and the hoopla and the fantasy and the mystique. Mike Tyson was brilliant for about 5 years.
Hmm.
5 years total. He was beaten, I think, by Buster before, if I'm correct, before he was 24 years of age.
Hmm.
And then of course, we know what happened after that in the jail time, and he comes back. And well, I think you're going to get to this, but there was a time when I think Mike Tyson might have beaten some of the guys that beat him later on, like a Lennox Lewis, like an Evander Holyfield. Perhaps had Mike fought them when, he was ferocious before the jail time,
Right.
he might have beaten both of those guys. I think Mike would have beaten the Lennox Lewis that Oliver McCall beat. And I think Mike Tyson would have beaten the Evander Holyfield that Burt Cooper had near death. Remember that fight? And
Yeah,
I
very
think
much
Mike
so.
would have. So those are two times Mike, but that's not the way it played itself out. Mike had a brilliant career. Where we rank him, we can talk about that or not, but
Sure.
certainly what he accomplished. Barry Tompkins was right with that statement because he started then what would become Mike. You know how we talk about how bad boxing is now, how
Hmm.
it's so not being talked about, how nobody, and we got all the crap. Man, there were, even if it lasted, and you knew going into a Mike Tyson fight that it might only last, 1 or 2 rounds. But boy, oh boy, you got your beer, your soda, your popcorn, your pizza, whatever you're drinking and eating. You got there early, and people loved it because they knew they were going to see something, and it was going to be fast and furious, and that's what we saw. And he will always be remembered by me for that explosiveness. But saying that he could have been, as great as a Larry Holmes or an Ali or a Lennox Lewis, no. Saying that he could have had this much longer career and been successful in his mid, no, not to me. So I think I pontificated enough there.
Well, Mike Tyson, his best performances, you're right. He pretty much burned out before age 25 at the most. But his mystique, the
Yeah.
mystique that he created, he still has it. Because how else could you explain how a 58-year-old Mike Tyson could be one half of an attraction? People still remember what he did, and they should
Who
have
do
known
more
better.
people in this country know right now? Bud Crawford, Usyk, or Mike Tyson.
Right.
Mike Tyson. I mean, he's still probably the most famous name in boxing today. Not counting Ali, but in what in one of the most famous of all times.
Very much so. I think that Muhammad Ali is the number one GOAT when it comes to global fame. But Mike Tyson's right up there, isn't he?
Yeah, he's there, and unfortunately, not all of it is for the reasons that Ali. Although Ali had some, he was no angel, and that's going to be in my book. But but still, you're right. And so, are we? Is there anything else we're discussing with this?
Well, let's just put a bow on this.
Okay.
If you were to rate Mike Tyson among the great heavyweights, where would you put him? I would put him in the lower end of the top 10.
Yeah.
You know, you have to honor what he did during his first title reign. It lasted almost 4 years. I think he had 10 title defenses. That's pretty historic numbers. But then after that, not so much. He had his hiccups and he had his controversies. He's had his DQs and everything like that. But
Through all the good, the bad, and the ugly, Lee, for me, I think I'd put him somewhere 9 at the highest, and
mhm,
maybe 13 as the lowest. I see him somewhere between 9, 10, and 11 for me.
fair, fair. Yeah, I probably put him between 8 and 10, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
again, that's based on everything, and maybe there are guys ahead of him that he might have beaten,
yeah,
maybe, but it's
on his
tough to
best
do
night.
it. But he has, man, I've spent some great times with him. I'm smiling because he was always good to me. Before he won his first world title, he knew that I covered his rape trial and supported him in the sense that I did not think that he raped Desiree Washington. I made that clear, and I still feel that way today. Not saying he did the right thing. He didn't, but I don't think he raped her. And I got caught up into the Tyson because he would always do my show, and sometimes I would be the only one he would let interview. John Horn and Rory Holloway would facilitate interviews with me that nobody else could get. So I picked him against Holyfield both times, and I was wrong both times. But I didn't pick him to beat Lennox Lewis. I was a round or two off on that one. And I've been really honest, but I can still say that, the sit-down interview with him that I did is one of my most proud moments because it was, before Oprah had him on where he really talked about the ear bite and that he felt bad. And then to get in the ring with him.
Yes.
He was not trying to hurt me or I wouldn't be here right now. Because that was, when he still could fight a little bit, it was at the end of his career. I think it was right before his last fight because Jeff Finnick was there. And I have my mouth's doing pretty good. Thank you, Dr. Persky, for finishing things off. Nam Fan, you too. I look great. But anyway, I had a bridge. And, Mike, and just in demonstrating, he tapped me, and you know the story. You wrote about it. My bridge fell out. John Hyatt, my producer of the show, wanted to sell it on eBay the next day. Anyway, I'm honored that he did an in-ring with me, and when I do public speaking, as I do for Hilton, and when I do speeches all around the country and around the world, everybody wants to know what it was like to be inside the ring with Mike Tyson. And, we'll save it for another time to run some of the footage. But if you even watch my facial expressions, it was one of the times that I was off my game a little bit because I'm realizing, damn, I'm in here. And Mike did just such a great job of demonstrating, his hooks to the body and uppercuts, and especially that Frank Bruno in their first fight combination, boom, boom, God. So look, Mike has everything to be thrilled about. I didn't even think he'd be alive now, and he's a global figure. I hope he never, I've been saying this for a long time, I hope he never steps into the ring again. But while his candle did burn, boy, it was a flame that will be remembered forever in pugilistic history.
Very much so. Very much so. All of us have special memories about Mike Tyson, and I prefer to remember the guy who was blasting guys out with tremendous left hooks, the upper body movement, the combinations. That guy was special.
Yeah, no doubt. So, we've got, I hope everybody enjoys the fights today, and hey, we'll be back next week, and we've got, a pretty interesting show. We won't give too much of it away, but next week we'll be recapping the Saudi card. I'm sure we'll have some other stuff. And, we say boxing's biggest names. Well, we certainly have a big name that'll be part of with us as our special guest, right?
It is a name that certainly resonates with your history. I wrote a book about this fellow's grandfather. And if you haven't guessed already, it is Nico Ali Walsh, the grandson of Muhammad Ali. It'll be interesting to have him on the show to talk about his life, his career, and where he goes from here.
Wide-ranging. He's an articulate dude. He turned out to be a tough dude. So I'm anxious. That'll be a lot of fun. Anyway, great job, Lee Groves. Enjoy the fights, everybody. We'll see you next week with Nico Ali Walsh. So long, everybody.